What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are here with the greatest Joker story ever told. The ending of this is going to be crazy, right? The ending of this story is going to be absolutely nuts, and you're going to see why it's the greatest Joker story ever told. But this story takes place during Flashpoint. So for those of you guys who have seen our videos when we originally covered them, or who have recently watched the Flashpoint full story video that we recently uploaded, bear with me here, because I think we might be getting some people who are new to all this. So to give you guys a really quick and dirty explanation about the Flash storyline, this was basically a story where Barry Allen the Flash had gone back in time and saved his mom's life. But when he did that, it had basically altered reality. We didn't initially know he had done that. We didn't figure out that was the case until later on down the line when Reverse Flash showed up. But by changing this whole reality here, it was basically a story where everything was turned on its head. This Batman story is very much a part of that, and it's the same way. But it's the reason why what you're going to see over the course of this is that there's going to be moments when Batman talks about having the ability to change history, to change the way things are supposed to be, because he had already met with Barry Allen, and Barry Allen had already told him what it was that he had done, and Barry Allen intended to fix everything so he could set the timeline back. So that's what Batman's basically talking about here. But what this does is it basically picks up with Batman just essentially sitting down and talking to a therapist. Now, this isn't overly important. In fact, he basically runs a whole like Wayne gambling casino and everything that's going on. Now, I know this seems like a little strange, right? Why would Batman be running like a casino operation, all that kind of stuff? This all makes sense at the end. So don't worry, I'm not gonna leave you guys hanging. It all makes sense at the end. So what happens here is, of course, him meeting with this guy. Batman's older, he's grizzled, right? He's a guy, he looks like he's from like the Batman Beyond TV show, right? Like just an old version of Batman. But he kind of talks about how the whole reason why he's even meeting with this therapist is because he has to verify that he's insurable, that he's of like sound mental health and all that kind of stuff. But all in all, like they know it's just a great big huge sham. And so ultimately the therapist just stamps pass on his file, and then of course all that stuff's over. But following this, he meets with Oswald Cobblepot. Now this is one of the big differences here. In the main DC universe, Oswald Cobblepot is the Penguin. He's a bad guy, right? He literally runs a whole nightclub that basically allows crime and everything to operate through it. He's one of the many crime bosses that exist in DC Comics. Unlike the Joker, who's just a madman, and to really quote the late great Kevin Conroy from Batman the Animated Series, that his schemes make sense to no one but himself, Oswald Cobblepot and even guys like Two-Face to a degree, they're more organized and they're more structured. So they have a desire to kind of control their segment of crime within Gotham City. It's not that way here, right? In this universe, Penguin is basically just one of the many guys who works for Batman. And while there is some erroneous stuff going on here, and even Batman himself is kind of dabbling in crime to a degree, what he says is the reason why he has this entire gambling operation and casino operation going on in the first place is because what it does is it allows crime to come to him, as opposed to him having to go out and find crime. It's a pretty ingenious scheme, to be honest with you. Like, it's pretty intelligent. But following that, you basically have Batman meeting with Commissioner Gordon. Now, the funny thing about this is, of course, he kind of blows off Commissioner Gordon to a degree, so the relationship between the two is a bit strained, but there's a really, really interesting situation here. So, of course, much like the main DC universe, Harvey Dent is the mayor of Gotham City. And so as they're having this conversation, one of the things he says is, Harvey's right? His panties are in a bunch. And the response of Jim Gordon is, his twins were kidnapped by the Joker. Does that qualify for getting your panties in a bunch? And that's where Batman responds and saying, Jim, there's nothing we can do about it yet. And of course, the response of Jim is, try to tell him that. And so then they get into this discussion about Arkham, right? And ultimately, Batman just says, like, Arkham's useless. And that's where the conversation picks up with Harvey Dent. And the question Harvey Dent has is, then why does the Joker always end up there? And the response of Gordon is, because he's insane. And this is when things get cool, because Harvey Dent responds in saying, and a menace, like Hush, Scarecrow, Poison Ivy, and they're all dead. Now, one of the things about this is that in this reality, that you, instead of having a traditional police force, you've got Gotham security. So think of like Gotham police that are more like militarized, that have more of a military-like presence, and that's really what Gotham security is. But the other part of this is they say that really Jim Gordon says like Gotham security had no part in the death of those different characters. And that's when the response of Harvey Dent is, I know, Batman did. And of course, that's when he points to Batman. So one of the things to know is I doubt it's done on a national level or on even like a citywide level, but people who would not traditionally know who Batman is know who Batman is. And that's kind of a funny thing, because the response of Harvey Dent is, you sold me on this idea that like Gotham security could be a police force that could be privatized and could effectively keep the city safe. And instead, now what we have is Batman, who's kind of picking up the slack, but he's killing villains. Now, one of the things to know here is that while Harvey Dent, quote unquote, stands against this or seems to stand against it, in a lot of ways he doesn't. Because one of the big philosophical arguments that goes on in the Batman comics is Batman actually doing the city of Gotham any good by capturing villains like the Joker and throwing him in an insane asylum, knowing that the system can't hold the Joker, that by whatever manner and whatever means, the Joker will ultimately escape and go back on a crusade in killing people again? Isn't it better to simply just kill those guys? Are there some criminals that are just beyond redemption? Now, I'm not arguing one way or the other, but what I am saying here is there is a moral argument to be made there, right? Do the ends justify the means? Basically utilitarianism, if you want to go that way. But of course, this is when Harvey's wife kind of steps in, and she's mourning the whole process and says like, my babies are in the hands of a kid killer, right? Like that's what the Joker is here in this universe. And so that's where things get kind of wild, is because this really impacts Batman on a very personal level. And we'll find out why, right? But it really impacts him on a very, very personal level. And even with Harvey Dent, it's the same way. And so that's why when you have Batman who stands up and says, I will get your kids back, Harvey, don't worry. The response of Harvey is, you better, because if you don't, I will destroy everything that you have, right? Your whole gambling casino, everything that Wayne's built on, your money, the whole 9 yards, it's all gone. Everything that you have is gone. So in a lot of ways, what it looks like here is Batman is basically a city-sanctioned vigilante. And that's another major difference from the main DC universe, that in a lot of ways, the city tolerates Batman, but they don't like Batman. I mean, the average person does, sure, but like the Gotham City Police Department, government officials, they don't like Batman. They realize that he serves a purpose and that he can kind of get things done in a way that they can't, but they tolerate his presence at the very best. Here, he's almost kind of supported, and it's almost like, yes, we allow you to do your thing, because without you here, things will be much, much worse. But understand, we keep you on a leash to a degree. And so that's where things get cool, because this is one of those moments when I talk about how Batman has already met with Barry Allen during the main Flashpoint story, the idea of changing things up, because he asked Jim Gordon, he says, like, the world's a bad place. Like, this world is a really bad place. Because one of the things to know and to understand what's going on outside of Gotham, in the Flashpoint universe, the Amazons and the Atlanteans are at war with each other. Wonder Woman and Aquaman, they're at war, right? Like literally it's a world war between them. And there's like all kinds of people who are caught in the side. A lot of you guys are probably asking, where's Superman during Flashpoint? Superman's being held by the government underground, exposed to a red sun. He's got a really, really cool story in Flashpoint. It's really, really interesting. And I'm pretty sure there's a story that focuses on what happened with Superman when he arrived in Flashpoint. I'll double check, because if there is, we will definitely cover it, because it's one of the coolest things. He's not the Superman you know. And honestly, it's one of the coolest stories about his character. But he talks to Jim Gordon and says, like, if you could change things, right? If you could change the world, would you? And where Jim Gordon is kind of responding by saying, like, that's what I signed up for, they're talking about things from two different perspectives. Jim Gordon is talking about this from like, yeah, I'm trying to change the world by cleaning up crime and so on and so forth. But the reality is they both know it's a stopgap measure, right? Like for every criminal that gets put away in Gotham City, another criminal is going to take their place for a variety of reasons, right? So it's a war of attrition. It's always one step forward, one step back. There really is no progress being made here. But again, what Batman's talking about is after his meeting with Barry and realizing that what's actually going on here is Barry can change reality, then Batman's talking about on a grander scale. If you could literally change the timeline, would you do it? And so that's where things get really, really cool, is because following this, we of course basically pick up with Batman kind of continuing down into what passes for the Batcave, right? It's not really the Batcave like you know. It doesn't have like all these crazy advanced supercomputers and everything. It's pretty makeshift, right? It's like what you would see in a setup video on YouTube. You know what I mean? You got like a Mac over there, right? And like a couple monitors, you know, and like a filing cabinet. Like that's literally it. It's not like the grandiose Batcave, right? that we're all familiar with. So it's cool. It's like a setup you and I would have. But again, the other part of this is that where Batman's asking Jim Gordon what information they have in relation to like the Joker, that the response of Jim Gordon is like, we don't really have anything concrete. All we have are just kind of the ramblings of junkies and vagrants and people whose word we may not necessarily believe. And even then, they all just kind of seem to be babbling nonsense. They keep talking about how like the devil came out of the ground and snatched people up and took them down to hell. And we don't really know what any of that stuff is. But ultimately, this leads to Batman realizing there's more truth to this than Commissioner Gordon is giving it. It's just clouded by a combination of schizophrenia and being addled on drugs. And so once he gets down into the sewers below Gotham, he literally starts finding body parts. And then there's all these people who are just kind of kept inside this bunker who are literally begging for help because they're essentially being consumed, right? They're literally just being like portioned out, like legs are missing and hands are missing and things like that. They're being used as food, only for us to find out it's actually Killer Croc. Now, that's one of the crazy things about this, is because, again, unlike the DC universe, where Killer Croc does have a pretty dark history, and depending on what story you read, this is fairly normal. In the regular Batman comics, Killer Croc isn't necessarily like this. He's a villain, and there's allusions to the fact that, like, he eats people, and in some origins, you find out he does. But to see him on such a dark level, where he's literally just harvesting human beings who are alive by removing body parts and eating them, it's pretty dark, and it's pretty twisted. But this is one of the other big differences between Batman from the main DC universe and Batman in the story. Because in the main DC universe, Batman would just like beat this guy up, right? He would subdue him and then he would hand him over to Arkham, and that's effectively it. A fight breaks out between the two, and then Batman literally gouges his eye out of his head and then basically kills him. And so it's like, okay, like Batman's just straight up killing folks, literally takes this machete and just gashes it into Killer Croc's head, and that's the end of him. And then he cuts him in half. And so it's pretty messed up, right? It's pretty twisted. But that's when we switch over to the Joker. And the Joker basically possessing or having these two twins of Harvey Dent just kind of starts doing Joker muses, right? Just kind of babbling to itself. And the Joker saying things like, you know, let's play house. Since there's three of us, someone gets to be the daddy and someone gets to be the baby and the mommy. We'll all have fun. And then he'll show up, right? So it's just the Joker kind of being the Joker to a degree. But following that, Commissioner Gordon, again, kind of launching his own investigation aside from Batman, trying to figure out what's going on with like Harvey Dent's kids, basically says he's going to go see Oracle. Now, in the main DC universe, Oracle is Barbara Gordon, the daughter of Commissioner Gordon, that she was Batgirl when she first showed up, and then during the Killing Joke storyline, she was shot through the abdomen, she was paralyzed, and because she was wheelchair bound, she couldn't run around the city of Gotham, she basically made up for it by being an information broker. She was the eyes and ears of not just the Bat family, but even Commissioner Gordon himself. And depending on what fans you're talking to, there are a lot of fans out there, and I'm one of them. I kind of like Barbara Gordon more when she was Oracle than when she was Batgirl, right? I think she was just more interesting. There was a lot more going on with her character. But in this universe, it's not Barbara Gordon because Jim never had kids. It's Selina Kyle. Now, the origin and what goes on with Catwoman here isn't actually explained in this story, so we'll explain it here. The way this played out, and this was actually done during the City of Bane storyline during Tom King's Batman run, that what we ended up finding out is that because there was no Barbara Gordon, because Jim Gordon never had a daughter, instead, Selina Kyle her origin is very much intact, right? She was kind of a thief in her younger years, almost a prodigy when it came to being a burglar, but she was ultimately discovered by Batman, who took her under his wing and then turned her into a Robin, right? She was literally just his sidekick. Now, one of the cool things about this happening is that much like Dick Grayson, when he was originally made Robin in the old Batman comics back in the 1940s, in a lot of ways, it softened Batman here because he was hardcore and he had no qualms with just killing criminals. No qualms with that. But by having Selina Kyle, she provided a kind of gentler hand. But much like the Killing Joke storyline when Barbara Gordon was shot, Selina Kyle was shot as well. The difference is that where Barbara Gordon was paralyzed from the waist down, like Selina Kyle is a complete quadriplegic. She does not have the ability to move her arms or her legs, or really like any part of her body from the neck down. And so because of that, she is still sort of the information broker, but it's interesting to see that it's Selina Kyle instead of Barbara Gordon. Now, for those of you guys who were reading Tom King's Batman and you saw Flashpoint Batman show up in that story, this is the reason why he's so adamant about ending the relationship between Bruce and Catwoman, because in his universe, this is what happens to Selina, that her being by Batman's side in any capacity will ultimately lead her to meeting either either death or potentially a fate worse than death, depending on who you talk to. So that's one of the big reasons why he wanted to see that end. But it's a very sad moment here because she really kind of talks about the idea of the Joker and saying that, like, the Joker goes after kids. Selena Kyle was one of his victims, and she's always been this way ever since she first encountered the Joker. And so again, it's a pretty dark and twisted moment, but one of the things she talks about is that out by Bristol Township, there was a pizza delivery car that had just kind of been stolen and has just been ticketed like multiple times because it was there, but the driver had gone missing. The car was never reported stolen because for the pizza places, they buy the cars used, and it's easier to just let him be a lost cause than it is to go through all the paperwork and all that kind of stuff. But this basically gives at least Commissioner Gordon a tip, a direction to go on. At least go investigate that, because the missing person and the entire situation matches the MO of the Joker almost down to a T. And so of course Commissioner Gordon goes on his investigation, and at the same time you've got Batman doing his investigation, where the two of them have a kind of conversation. Commissioner Gordon actually lies and says he's at the morgue. Batman says, well, I'll be there soon. But ultimately Commissioner Gordon's investigation, where he tells Batman, don't worry about it, man, it's cool, you focus on your case, everything's solid. The truth about this is he's heading to Wayne Manor because all the clues that he's pieced together indicate this is where the Joker is, and this is where the Joker's keeping the twins, and this is where things get nuts. And so that's when you switch over to the Joker, who again is going off on this kind of maddening bit of a tirade, right? The Joker says, you don't know anything but joy, do you, children, besides fear, joy and fear. And the Joker says, little ones, they're all that matter. You lose one and you'll go crazy. You lose both. Can you and should you even imagine life without those anchors? Of course not. You'll go absolutely mad. And so again, with Batman continuing on his investigation, he basically meets with what would be Harvey Bullock under a normal circumstance, which is to say a detective in the Gotham City Police Department. It looks like Harvey Bullock still is, but he's kind of a shell of his former self. Instead of being the more grizzled and experienced detective, this guy's just a drunk, right? Like his life is an absolute mess. Not only that Batman picking up the clues about the pizza delivery car, that Renee Montoya says the Joker had shown up there one day and offered everybody a piece of pizza. And then of course, because it's the Joker offering anybody anything, basically everybody said no, except for the new guy, right? Like literally Ricky, this new guy who was working the door and had no idea what the Joker was about and didn't really know to say no. And so of course this pizza had the Joker toxin in it, but what this does is it tells Batman a couple things. One, yes, the Joker is the whole person behind the stealing of the pizza delivery car, and that two, this shows us that Batman realizes when it comes to the Joker toxin, that he's never developed a cure for it. This Batman is not nearly as intelligent or capable as the Batman that we know from the main DC universe, because that Bruce Wayne basically created a toxin for the Joker serum long ago. It was one of the first things he did when he realized that Joker was just running around with the toxin and spraying it on people or exposing it to people, and they would literally just laugh to death. This guy, Ricky, is just sitting here laughing his ass off, exposed to the toxin. Batman does the only thing he can, which is to help this guy finish with all his living, to put him out of his misery. Right? That's the only thing that he can do. And so of course, contacting Oracle basically spills the beans and talks to him about like the pizza delivery car and all that kind of stuff. And she's like, Jim Gordon already has this information. And that's when Batman realizes Jim Gordon has gone to Wayne Manor to find the Joker. Now this point, this is when stuff gets so cool, because you have Jim Gordon, you switch over to his character, he's making his way through Wayne Manor, he ultimately catches up to the Joker, and once he enters into the room, the Joker's standing there with these two guns pointed at this kid. Jim Gordon immediately pulls the trigger, only for us to find out it's not the Joker, it's the little girl. And she's been put on a chair and taped to it and dressed to look like the Joker. Jim Gordon took this girl out, not realizing it, right? And so of course he runs up there trying to save her. The Joker comes up behind him, slices his throat on the spot. Dude, I told you guys, this story is amazing, right? This Joker story is nuts. It's the greatest Joker story that's ever been written, which makes sense because it was written by Brian Azzarello, who wrote The Joker. If you guys never read that story, we need to cover it because it's the second greatest story about the Joker of all time. I might call it that, the second best Joker story ever. I don't know if anybody would watch that, but it is really, really good, right? But this guy knows how to write the Joker is the biggest point that I'm making here. But Jim Gordon's dead, man. Like this, I mean, he's dying. He's not necessarily dead, but basically like Batman rushes to Wayne Manor as fast as he can possibly get there. And while this is happening, he's met with a broadcast from the Joker, who literally starts showing like Jim Gordon basically bleeding out and dying, you know, choking on his own blood, the little girl who was shot by Jim, and like her little brother who's just there, right? Who's like just watching the whole thing unfold. And so Batman busts into Wayne Manor Manor and just screams like, "What have you done this time?" and refers to the Joker as Martha, because in this universe, Bruce Wayne is dead. So here's how this happened, right? I told you guys, the ending to this is crazy, and it's the greatest twist ever for a Batman comic. So here's what happened, right? Here's how this whole thing unfolded, right? So what happened is Joe Chill, right, just like always, goes after the Wayne family. The difference here is that Thomas attacked him, and in the fight between Thomas and Joe Chill, Bruce Wayne was shot and killed. So Bruce is dead. This led to Thomas Wayne going on a kind of personal vengeance. Now, to a degree, because of the fact that Martha was struggling so badly to handle the entire situation, and even when the cops showed up on the scene, and there's only so much that we can do here, they couldn't find Joe Chill, right? They're like, we have no clues or anything like that. It filled Thomas Wayne with rage, and it filled Martha Wayne with grief, to the point that like she's not doing very well with like therapy. She's just grieving, she's depressed, right? She's almost just kind of in a catatonic state, just sort of sitting there and just kind of staring out, and just, she's not really herself. But then it kind of occurs to Thomas Wayne, like, what if I took care of it, right? What if I'm the one who was able to get this sorted out? So he literally pays some random guy to give him the location of Joe Chill. And then he initially goes after Joe Chill with a needle in order to kill him. But instead, he beats him to death. He literally beats Joe Chill to death with his bare hands. It was the first time Batman, or really Thomas Wayne as Batman, ever killed anybody. And then once he gets back to Wayne Manor and he meets with Martha, he tells her, like, you know, it's okay, I took care of it, the guy's dead. And Martha spins around and says, yeah, I understand now, Thomas. I'm finally smiling, right? It's like the Dark Knight, right? It's like Heath Ledger's Batman, right? Now I see the funny side. Now I'm always smiling, right? So literally Martha went insane because of the death of Bruce Wayne, and she became the Joker, right? And so literally, like, Bruce Wayne ultimately had her committed, but there was no holding her back. Eventually she found a way to escape, and kind of because her insanity was rooted in the death of Bruce, that's how she lives her life, always going after kids. She's not the Joker that we know who just goes after anybody and kind of doing this dance between himself and Batman and that kind of thing. Like, it's a cat and mouse, almost kind of a romantic relationship between the two, right? One that's predicated on just death and destruction and heinousness and all that kind of stuff. But Martha is just outright insane and almost kind of reliving her past trauma over and over and over again. And so ultimately, what ends up happening here is that as her and Thomas are fighting one another, he finally catches up to her and almost has this moment where he starts to bring her back, right? He starts to bring her back as normal because she keeps spouting all these things like, for old time's sake and all that kind of stuff. So what it looks like is she hasn't been Joker for all that long. It's not like the Joker in the main DC universe where he's been that way for years, potentially even decades, or if you read Scott Snyder's Batman, New 52, that he's literally the pale man who's been around for hundreds of years operating as the Joker. I know it's crazy. It's an amazing story. We'll have a link to it down in the description because oh my God, Batman Endgame was just a great story by Scott Snyder. But the thing here is that as he forces her to confront this, right, then he literally says, okay, like, back to old time's sake, what if I told you that things could have been different? What if I told you that we were in Crime Alley and there's 2 gunshots that get fired and then 2 bodies fall over and a boy is left crying? What if I told you it could have just been us who died, right? What if I told you that I could change things so that it was us who died and our son lived? Would you not be okay with giving your life for our son? And the response of Martha is, promise me if you can change things that you will, right? Promise me, Thomas, you can set things back to normal. And so ultimately it's a cool moment because he's able to kind of reel her back to becoming normal again. And so then she simply says, then tell me about Bruce. What does he do after we're dead? Because remember, Barry Allen told Thomas everything about the Bruce Wayne from the main DC universe. And so it kind of gave Thomas hope because it's like, my son lives. I mean, sure, he becomes a vigilante and he betrays the Justice League a few times and, you know, he's got infinite prep time under any circumstance, but still, right? Like, at least he lives and he finds a way to avenge our deaths in the best way that he can possibly do. But when this situation is spilled to Martha, where she asked the question, like, when literally Thomas says he follows his father's footsteps, and she asks, he becomes a doctor, the response of Batman is, No. And that's when she realizes he becomes like you are, like he becomes what you are, but in a different universe, and she snaps back to being her Joker self. There's no way to bring her back. There's no way to fix her, right? There's no way to get her back to being sane. But as she takes off running, she ends up basically slipping down into a hole to what would have normally been the Batcave had it been discovered by Thomas Wayne. But falling down into this giant hole in the middle of the ground, she ultimately just crashes onto the ground below and breaks her neck in the process. And that's the end of Martha Wayne. That's the story of her. That's literally where the story ends. It just kind of ends all of a sudden. But I told you guys, it's the greatest Joker story ever told. It's phenomenal. And it's got like the best twist ever. So with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Hopefully we see this in the Flashpoint film. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.